Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
I'm Nick Davis, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, I screwed the times up. You know, normally I'm the one like going, no, dang it. It was this time, that time. And today it was me, man. It's my fault. I'm sorry. Thanks for hanging in there
No
for
worries.
me. Everybody who's who's been waiting on this, I'm sorry. All right, so listen, you did this incredible thing. You told this great story that I've always been dying for someone to tell. I'm not even from New York, but those 86 Mets were an exciting team from an exciting time. You know, like the 85 Bears did something crazy. 86 Mets, you could see them coming, and they were just so magical. All of that aside, I think the first song you play in that thing is Age of Consent by New Order, which is hitting a home run musically.
Okay, thank you. That's actually not the first song, but it's early in episode 1. And yeah, I mean it's funny. It's like because you hear a little bit of Beastie Boys in the cold open. And then the graphic open, we have Tom Waits' Clap Hands, which is a song from his 1985 Rain Dogs album. But then, yes, once you sort of get into the show proper and you hear that song, that's the first time we're sort of saying, look, you see this team and this city, they're fusing. Well, I'm glad you like that song.
Well, I like the music in general. I mean, some of it wasn't, I'm assuming some of it was some kind of stock or something to emulate the time or whatever. But just in general, there were great music choices throughout. Who was your musical director?
You're talking to him. We did have, I don't want to be like some kind of credit hog. We had music supervisors and they were great. And every once in a while we would say, hey, we need something for this. But really it was me and the editors. And I, way back when, long before I pitched this, I edited just for myself. I broke down the show into 18 chapters. And each of them was just about 45 seconds long. And I just had one musical song. And then here's what is going to happen in this chapter. And here's what's going to happen in that chapter. And a lot of the songs from that that was just like sort of a sketch for myself. And a lot of the songs that ended up in the show came from that first thing. But I mean, it was really a part of what I wanted to do was bring people back to that time and place. It was tremendously exciting and dangerous and sort of cool and exhilarating. And the Mets, unlike a lot of sports teams, just really seem to, as I said, like fuse with their time and place in a way that a lot of sports teams, can be great, but you don't instantly think, oh, the 1975 Cincinnati Reds, Cincinnati. I can see Cincinnati in 1975. Well, maybe you can. I can't. But anyway, So anyway, the music was a big part of that.
Yeah, I love it. And is New Order and these other alternate things, because you could go a lot of different directions.
Looked it up and they played there. No, we were trying to go with what was popular, who lived it. I mean, my musical tastes in the 80s were terrible and almost non-existent. But it was really an attempt to sort of capture the team's spirit, really, more than anything else.
When you're filming, and Keith Hernandez was just fantastic. I mean, just great. But when his cat is jumping up and being part of every shot, are you rolling with that? Do you know that going in, or is it just a happy thing that just
it was just a total? Yeah, I mean, I knew, as Met fans do, because right. His cat Haji has become something of a little internet sensation. But so we started Keith's interview actually outside on his little porch in Florida at his condo in I can't remember whether it's Jupiter or somewhere overlooking the waterway there. And it was a little loud. There were boats, and then there was a lawnmower. So we moved inside, and as soon as we moved inside, you saw that Haji had the run of the place, and on the set, there was some discussion. Certain people were like, well, maybe we should put the cat in in another room. And Keith it was clear like Keith didn't want to put the cat in another room. And I felt like, come on, like we want our interviewees to be as comfortable as possible. So if Keith is going to be more comfortable with the cat there, then that's what we're going to do. And it was just great. And I do remember in the interview, when he finally addressed Haji after, hours of talking, he finally was talking about his 7th game at bat against Bruce Hurst, and the first pitch buckled him. And then he choked up on the bat because all that was needed was a base hit. And he looks at the cat and he says, right, Hodge? And I just remember thinking, well, that could really work, and it went in. And I'd forgotten about it until the editor showed me the sequence. And I was like, oh, God, that was great. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to be open to those kinds of accidents or you wouldn't be making documentaries, it seems to me.
You had so many different elements in this. So many great people talking about the time. Jeff Pearlman's been on the show a couple of times, and normally he's kind of I don't want to say cantankerous, but he's not the happiest guy to be in front of a camera, right? But you see,
no, he's pretty.
Yeah.
Well, he's very snarky. I mean, his brand is snark is too. I don't mean to demean him. I mean, he's so intelligent, but always with that wit. And that's why I think he was drawn to the '86 Mets. Like they're such a good subject for his particular style of wit. And we had a great conversation with him, and he was very patient. And with the pandemic, all of it made production so difficult. But he was a particularly terrific interviewee.
And just a great call because exactly right. He loves stories like this. I think he's working on a Bo Jackson book right now, and that definitely will be that time frame.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, he's great, and it was a great call to see him there. Great to get Billy Beane.
I think people forget that Billy Beane was a member of the Mets organization, and maybe knock wood, he will be again soon. But I just thought, well, he's so intelligent, and he came up with all these guys. He came up with Strawberry and Mitchell and Giraldi and Dykstra. And so I think, he's so smart that I thought it would be, in a way, he and Ed Lynch were sort of like insider outsiders. They were both on the team. Beane was traded before '86. Lynch was traded during '86. But just sort of interesting, intelligent kind of almost viewer surrogates. Like I couldn't be Darryl Strawberry or Keith Hernandez or Carter, but maybe, in a different world, maybe I could have been Ed Lynch, and I couldn't have been. He's a supremely talented athlete, but like those kinds of viewer surrogates are always fun to have.
And then as you're going through the list of Mets, you could grab Ed Hearn. You can grab some of these other players who are secondary players. And in some ways you did, because Kevin Mitchell, who gets traded for Kevin McReynolds later on, but Kevin Mitchell is in it, and he plays his own role. But there's a lot of guys that played roles like Kevin that year. Why Kevin and not, I don't know, any of the other number of players that were all, contributors?
Well, he was so charismatic that year. I mean, as a player, he was so charismatic, and as a personality, and as it turned out, as like a key figure in the clubhouse, which only sort of came to light after he was traded. And you sort of realize, like, what happened to the chemistry on this team? Like, losing him and Ray Knight, it was sort of like, well, you've lost like the heart and soul, and two of the three guys who got the hits in the 10th inning against the Red Sox in Game 6. Like, it was a weird thing. And I think that, as fans and as management, you sort of think of the stars and then like everybody else, like, hey, it doesn't matter. They're all interchangeable. Get Ray Knight out, bring in Hojo. Hojo's a 30-30 guy. McReynolds, 290 hitter, 25, 30 home runs every year, 90 RBIs. He's going to be as good, if not better, than Mitchell. But you lose the character. And that was the essence of the film for me, was character. And I had seen enough of Kevin Mitchell to know this guy is a great character. Bobby Ojeda is a fantastic character. Ray Knight what a great character. To say nothing of Wally and Lenny Dykstra, who we haven't even mentioned, who, is so captivating and weird. And he's tweeting today this great little video that Wally Backman should be the manager of the, should take over as manager for the Mets. And it seems pretty clear to me that he's tweeting this video from his bathroom. So it's like, just when you thought Lenny Dykstra couldn't be any more Lenny Dykstra.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned Wally Backman. I want to come back and talk about him too, but do you reach out to a Kevin Elster, or does Kevin, even though he's there, is he not enough? I mean, he's barely part of the story at all.
Yeah, so, it's funny. I mean, like the sort of, players 15 through 24 on that roster, right, and who we reached out to and who we didn't. I think we would have reached out to more if not for the pandemic. It put a crimp in our production style, and sort of how we operated. You couldn't really do more than one interview on a day once that happened. We were doing it remotely. I'm interviewing them from here in New York, hiring a camera crew in, for instance, San Diego to go to Kevin Mitchell. They put the laptop next to the camera and I'm zooming through and talking to them that way. So a lot of them happened that way. I think our original intention was to have about 60 interviews, and we ended up with 44. And of those 44, I think 14 played for the team. So Elster, the truth is Elster was a September call-up and didn't play a key role in any playoff or World Series game. And so he actually never even made the long list. As great, and also he was a great Met for the 87, 88, 89, 90 years. And I really wanted to keep the focus on 86. So same thing for Hojo, who I did ask, but we weren't able to make it work with Hojo. But we had to get Ray Knight first, and because of the pandemic, I'm sorry if you maybe don't need this level of detail on the logistics, but had to get Ray Knight because he was so crucial to the team.
Oh yeah.
And until I had Ray Knight, I couldn't even reach out to Hojo because I didn't want to end up with Hojo and no Ray Knight. Once I had Ray Knight, I reached out to Hojo, and we couldn't make it work. But, Hojo is really more associated and was great in the post-86 era. Jesse Orozco said no. He was early on. If it hadn't been for the pandemic, I'm sure I would have circled back with him and said, come on, I understand your hesitations. Talk to some of the other guys. That's not what we're doing. We're not just exposing everybody and we're just not out to get everybody. We're doing the complete saga of this team and time and place, and you're a part of it. We'd love to have you part of it. But other than that, we kind of got everybody we wanted, with the exception of George Foster, who, as we say in the film, declined to be interviewed.
George Foster's interesting. Just looking at him, you can see he's from another time. I mean, as a kid, I'm 16 in 86, right? And I remember this team really well because they were damn impossible to beat. And you see George Foster and you're like, who is this guy? Where is he from? Because he doesn't fit into the 80s at all. Like he just his hair situation is wrong. He's still 1972 50 home run George Foster, and now he's on the 86 Mets. I understand why you'd bring him in because the Mets didn't probably realize what he was or wasn't. They're like, yeah, why not? Let's take a flyer on this guy. Maybe he can teach our young guys how to act.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, when they got him in 82, he was still a feared slugger. I think he had a big year in 81, which was the strike year, but I think he hit something like 23 home runs and then he comes to the Mets, and it to me, it was like a symbol that Frank Cashin and the new owners were saying to the rest of baseball, like, we're serious. We mean business. We're getting this great guy who won MVP 5 years ago. It didn't work out. He had a terrible 82 and then got a little better, 83, 84, 85, and then a bad 86. But it was like the first sort of like the shot across the bow, like the Mets mean business. So that's why he was important. And then, the way he left the team was sort of a fascinating and quickly forgotten, story.
One of the other main characters in this is Cocaine. I mean, it's
Yes.
throughout. I mean, Len Bias makes an appearance in the series. And by the way, everybody's check it out. It's on ESPN. It's 30 for 30. You guys know how to do this, but it's called Once Upon a Time in Queens. And also, there's a book that accompanies the project, and it's also great. If you love this era of Mets and baseball, you'll love this book. It's right there.
Can I do this? Can I do this?
Yeah, you can do that for sure. And then I lost my link. I had it in here. Where is that thing? Anyhow, I'll pull it back up and put it up in a
That's
second.
fine.
And the link will also be in the show notes. So,
Cool.
what I want to get after is cocaine was a big player in this, whether it was Keith Hernandez, Len Bias, and everything in between. Talk about cocaine and its role in this whole project.
Well, funnily enough, I'm going to tell you a story about. So the executive producer was Jimmy Kimmel, and when we first were pitching the project, we went to the various networks, and unlike this is a documentary. We didn't have a lot of money, and we certainly didn't pay our interviewees, and they weren't part of the production team, or they had no editorial control or anything like that. But we were in a meeting at one of the networks, and the question came up, well, what would you do if these guys, want to be paid? And it's funny, I hadn't considered it. And I sort of was like, and I looked at the Major League Baseball executive producer, and we looked at each other, and we were like, gee, we never really. And from the speakerphone, Jimmy Kimmel piped in from Los Angeles, and he said, we'll pay them in cocaine. So, these guys, we all knew at the time. I mean, fans suspected, some fans probably knew, but cocaine was sort of rampant. It was like it was the party drug in the 80s in New York City. And so it was sort of natural that these guys fell into it. And they were all out, not all of them, but most of them were out partying at night. And so it wasn't a surprise, really, to many of us that, the following spring training, Dwight Gooden fails a drug test, and, his and Daryl's battles with cocaine have been well documented. But, and Keith Hernandez had just come from the drug trials in Pittsburgh in September of '85. So we all knew baseball was grappling with this drug issue that summer. And then when Len Bias died, it was a moment. And I remember, I was older than you a little bit. And I remember a fellow fan saying to me, well, maybe that'll scare the guys straight. Like, we'll all just know, like, okay, no more cocaine, just stop it. Because Len Bias was this hugely talented basketball star who, died 2 days after he was drafted. And so I put the question to Dwight Gooden, like, well, how did you react? And it was true. For a couple of hours, he had the same reaction that I had and my friend had of like, yeah, they're not going to do this again. And then, as he said, and it was just incredible. He goes to his dealer and he says, give me some of that Len Bias stuff. He wants the strongest stuff you have. And it's so sad. And it speaks to the power of addiction and all of that. And it's just very, very sad. And so that was, as you say, it almost was like a character.
The mid 80s Mets were damned good. I remember when the Dodgers were playing them in the NLCS in '88, Kirk Gibson, maybe the last good play he ever made on the field. He just reaches out in the rain and slipping on the grass, and I'm reaching with my arm, and he just barely catches this ball. And this is the difference between the 87 Mets going against, or 88 Mets going against the A's. I mean, it's that thing. It's these fingertips. It's making a decision to pull Bill Buckner out, or, whatever, or just getting that ball. That play wasn't that hard. I bet you he makes that play the vast majority of the time, but he didn't that night. What do we attribute this to? Because, okay, so one of the things Keith Hernandez says is like, Lenny Dykstra could never bat in the analytics era against, a left-hander and everything else. But the reality is that they would have had better matchups the entire way through, because you would say, like, you're always taking the advantage in the analytic world. You're looking for these things. So sure, Lenny Dykstra gets it, but maybe you don't even need that hit in the analytics world. Maybe you have better players in general on the field. So what is it? I mean, I remember watching, and like, they are impossible to get out. Ray Knight was a pest all the time. And especially that year, Wally Backman, he's never as good as he was in '86 again. Good player, but that was his year. And so many guys seem to have that year and seem to have that ability to just make contact. So, and just do something,
to me, what it is, and I know that this goes against the analytics and everything, but to me, it really is, it's the desire to win. I do think that team, to a man, they all said they'd never been around a bunch of guys who so wanted to win. The ones who had been with the Mets during the, from Mookie on through the bad years really wanted it. And then 84 coming close against the Cubs, 85 even close against the Cardinals, 86, they were just ready. And it was all about winning. And, it's such a cliche, but I said to a lot of them, well, wait a minute, aren't all teams like that? Don't you always want to win? And I was like, no, if you get your 3 hits, he just said, you get your 3 hits on the Red Sox, you're happy. If you got your 3 hits on the Mets and you lost and you're happy, Ray Knight's going to get in your face, if not punch you. It was all about winning for that 1 year. And it's, it's hard to measure and you can't you just have to be happy that it happens. You can't sort of try and manage it because it's a kind of magic and it is a once in a lifetime thing. It is like Halley's Comet. It comes around once every however many years. And I have been shocked and disappointed as a Mets fan to watch teams that didn't have it. And McReynolds, I liked McReynolds as a player. He didn't have it. He didn't have that desire. He wanted to go hunting. There's a great story that we didn't have time for. What's fun about the book to me is that we didn't have time for, so much stuff. But Dykstra tells this great story about being invited hunting by McReynolds, down in Arkansas. And that, it's in the book, but we didn't have time for it in the film. And it's not a knock on McReynolds. There's a lot of solid players. And maybe if he'd been on the 86 Mets surrounded by everybody else, he would have risen up. But by the time he got there's no Ray Knight and there's no Mitchell. So, and Keith and Gary are getting older. So they're not going to get in your face. And they've won. What does just winning do to that hunger? I think it does something.
Well, these are guys that like to party too. And when you win, you get to party a lot more. So these are guys that didn't have any more need for more party. And there is something to that. I mean, I think obviously the big moment is the Dwight Gooden parade moment. We can get into that or we can save it for the audience, but it's telling, the results of what happens because the partying it's like mutual trains, like freight trains, just racing down the track, and which one's gonna win, the team or the partying? And the team won in '86.
Yeah, it won by about 4 hours. The dynasty lasted about 12 hours. And there it is, the dynasty, and then he doesn't come to the parade, and we knew at the time, and the New York Times reported that he had a case of the sniffles, and I just remember thinking I was 21. I was like, come on, sniffles.
We know.
Anybody could come up with a better excuse than sniffles. I mean, it just seemed like crazy. So anyway.
Yeah. You're a Mets fan. That's a different kind of pain. I mean, are you a Jets fan too?
No, I mean, in theory, but I'm a baseball fan.
Okay.
I would love to see the Jets win. I care more about the Jets than the Giants, but it's Mets,
Why did 86 Mets matter so much more than the other very, very successful Mets team? The Mets have been to the World Series. They've won another World Series.
They would have won. The 69 Mets are also an amazing team and an amazing story and a miracle. They didn't quite fuse with the city, although, the idea was, the Mets will win a World Series when man lands on the moon. Man lands on the moon. The Mets win the World Series. It's kind of great. But the 86 team and the way it was built and coming from the misery of the late 70s and the way the team got better as the city itself was sort of recovering or seeming to recover from the malaise and the Ford to City drop dead days and the blackout, Son of Sam and all of that. So that by the mid 80s, the city is swaggering, and no team had more swagger than the 86 Mets. So it was kind of perfect. So, I believe in my heart that if Wally Backman had managed the 2015 Mets, we'd be talking about the three great championships, at least, that the Mets had. But they didn't quite have the leadership in 2015 to push that team over the edge, and that was a team that should have won. I mean,
what about 73? Could they have beat them at the A's?
They could have beaten the A's, and if Yogi Berra had pitched George Stone in Game 6, yes, they could have beaten the A's, because then you'd have a fully rested Seaver in Game 7. But I don't know. I mean, they won 82 games. It's hard to feel too bad about the 73 team.
And since we're talking about Mets World Series team, how about 2000?
Again, I feel like there's a thing that happens with certain teams where they're just happy to be there. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how it is that you get, I mean, look, if I were in the World Series, I would be thrilled to be there. But I felt like the 2000 team, maybe because they were going up against the Yankees, if they'd been going up against any other team, I think they might have risen to the occasion. And also Valentine pulled Terry Collins before he was Terry Collins, and he wanted Leiter to go the whole game. Leiter had thrown, I mean, you could see Leiter was tiring in the 8th inning. You take Leiter out, nail down Game 5, let's go to Yankee Stadium and see what happens. Didn't happen. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
But to me, the 2015 team was really the one. I never fully believed the 2000 team was going to win. And I was convinced the 2015 team was going to win, in part because there's an interesting historical thing. You might like this, Pete. Seaver's third full season was 1969. They won the World Series. Dwight Gooden's third full season was 1986. They won the World Series. 2015 was Matt Harvey's third full season. And I was like, the whole season, I was like, it's it. He's our guy. He's leading us to the promised land the same way Gooden did and the same way Seaver did. And all the way to the 9th inning of Game 5, I believe they were going to win the World Series because of this idiotic thing that, you do as a sports fan. Magical thinking.
Like the Giants out here with their even numbered years.
Right, the odd years, even years. Yeah.
In 2015, you can't be too mad at the Royals getting their shot and
I like that. That was a good Royals team, and it's always nice to see a team get close and then break through the next year.
Right. Wasn't that Nolan Ryan's third year on the Mets too? 66, 68, 69. Isn't that right?
Yeah, but he wasn't like, Seaver was the Messiah. Seaver was the one, and Gooden was the one. And people forget what Harvey meant to that team. Yeah. When Harvey came on board, he was like, I mean, I still think of DeGrom as like Kuzman. He's like, yeah, he's good, but he's not Harvey. He's clearly much better than Harvey ever was. But because he came behind the guy who was leading this new era, I just have always felt like, yeah, but, Harvey's the guy, which is, whatever.
If the Mets had kept Ryan and had Seaver, there probably isn't a big red machine. At least that's not as big and as, not as championship filled.
Yeah, I've read a bunch of things that suggest that Ryan really didn't like New York, and he maybe would never have performed the way he ended up performing in California if he had stayed in New York. He didn't like the city. And I do think that's one of the things about the 86 Mets, like they welcomed it. There are players and athletes, I mean, Ed Whitson most famously, who just shrink, and just can't handle whatever it is that makes New York, New York. And then there are others, and I think Harvey was one. And certainly a bunch of those 86 Mets just really welcomed it. Whereas, others can tune it out, like McReynolds tuned it out. But Javi Baez, I want us to sign Javi Baez. He's made for New York. And I think Lindor is made for New York. I think Lindor is going to be fine.
Yeah. Didn't work out for Randy Johnson, really. I mean, he can pitch as good as he wants. It's never going to be good enough unless he's throwing no hitters all the time,
Well, yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's interesting. Could be.
I wanted to ask you about Lenny Dykstra. I agree that he is willed to win. He's one of those guys. Another guy who played baseball in New York, Chuck Knobloch. These guys never should have made it to the big leagues, but they just said, I'll be damned if I want to be damned by this. And they just insisted upon it. Pete Rose is a guy like this.
Yeah.
And his guys tend to be assholes outside of the outside of the stadium, And anybody who knows anything about Lenny Dykstra knows that he's had some challenges even recently, probably partly because of how he's wired.
Yeah, he's wired. He's different from everybody. And so many people have said, like, well, was he drunk during your interview? Or he seemed. I don't think so. I think that's just him. And you go back and you look at the tapes of him in '86. He was always that way. He's just, his personality is baseball, and that's it, and he's had a challenge. He's also very funny. I mean, he's even said, like recently, he'll tweet like, hey, it's been 35 months since I've been arrested, like,
yeah. But I'll tell you what, though, if you were in the mid 80s to mid 90s and he was on your team, the team was going to get it from him. I always, whenever I talk to young kids in sports, I'm like, what you owe the other team is that you play as hard. You be the hardest guy to beat in the field. Give them your absolute best. It's not like how you play. It's like, no, you expect it. I'm going to give you my hardest, my best. That might mean some punches and some cleats and some bad words sometimes, but that's what it's going to take to beat me. You're going to have to take that.
That's good. Yeah.
Lenny had that in spades.
Yeah. I think that's a real athlete mentality. And he would run through a wall to beat you, and he didn't care about anything other than beating you. Yeah. And you want guys like that on your team. It's just, it's weird when they don't have that.
Right. When you see him play in the outfield and you think, he does not care. You're right. Like, he's spitting tobacco juice. Remember they would show that, like all the tobacco juice around him. And if you're playing in Chicago and you're too delicate to go sliding across center field where he's been and spitting and everything, he's going to whoop you.
Yeah.
That's how hard he plays, Yeah.
Yeah. No, the staining of the grass around Lenny Dykstra. I think we looked for it. We couldn't find it. And maybe it didn't happen until later, because I remember on broadcast, they would show it and be like, it's gross.
In Philly, because it was turf, that's usually where they show
it. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
And they had a whole bunch of players like that, that were just going to, junk ruck and that kind of thing. He was in another good situation like that. Those were the kind of teams, he did well on.
Yeah, that Philadelphia team in I guess it was '93. That was a great, exciting team that you could make a great documentary about that team.
Right.
Yeah, I mean Schilling. I mean, they all just sort of, if they weren't your team, you hated them. But as Howard Bryant says of the '86 Mets, like, even if you hated them, there's a part of you that misses them when they're gone. That's kind of how I feel about the '93 Phillies. Like, I hated them, but I kind of missed them. That was fun.
Was Randy Myers on that Phillies team?
No. What's his face? The Wild.
Oh, Mitch
Wild
Williams. Mitch Williams.
Yeah. I mean, he was crazy, and yeah,
he was crazy.
Yeah.
Of all the teams from the '80s, is the '86 Mets are they the most story worthy?
Well, I think so. I think that, but there's others. I think that the Bash brothers, the Oakland teams of '88, '89, '90. Weird that they only won once. I think that, we could talk about La Russa if you want, but I feel like that was a really interesting team and a cool team. The Cardinals of the '80s were great. They were fascinating, fun, exciting team. There were, from that one year, the Tigers, when Gibson was on the Tigers in '84, that was a great team that ran away and hid. And I think they were 35-5 at one point. And it was just like, whoa, how good are these guys? And who are they? And they had a second baseman that Sparky Anderson said is going to be better than Joe Morgan. I can't remember his name. I mean, it didn't work out. Sparky Anderson used to pump up players like that. But to me, the '86 Mets, because of the way they won and the build, '84, '85, '86, as Chuck D says, it was a trilogy, and the culmination to win in that way, that postseason, which was just off the charts exciting, capped by this ridiculous miracle in Game 6. I think they may be well, I don't want to say best story, but at least it was a very satisfying story to tell.
Yeah. I mean, to win 108 games in the regular season, especially back then, I mean, that means you're grinding through the same teams that know you so well. Like now it's a little different where, you could bring up a minor leaguer and be like, who the hell is this guy? And they can dominate because you just have never even heard of this guy, right? It's so hard to do. But back then it was different. And a guy like Mookie Wilson is just you would never pick him. You would never, like, if you had 50 guys in the stadium, people are like, whatever, he's fast. But we got, he's just not a guy that stands out as kind of like Wally Backman. You're like, yeah, well, whatever. We'll bring him on over, But Mookie Wilson was a hell of a ball player.
Yeah, he was. He was actually a very exciting player. And again, like if you look at the analytics, Mookie Wilson is not a player who benefits from analytics. I think Backman would be because he drew a lot of walks. But Mookie was a free swinger. I mean, I think he went one year where he had like 650 at bats and walked 18 times.
Yeah.
And it was frustrating. And we knew at the time, like, he's not a good leadoff hitter. This is not a great way to get the game going. But he was so exciting on the bases and in the field. And I think, I think that the analytics has got to be balanced by chemistry and what are they bringing to the energy that you can't quantify. And, it's so frustrating to watch the games sometimes nowadays because you guy out because he's been through the batting order twice.
Yep.
And he's dealing. Are you watching the game? He's dealing.
Yes.
And it's maddening. And I pray, I don't think it's going to happen, but I do pray that at least the Mets can hire a manager who will say, I know the analytics says I should take this guy out, even though he has a no-hitter, but I'm going to leave him in because he's pitching really well. And
right.
and I just feel like they're not watching the game, and I'm Louis Rojas. We don't need to talk about Louis Rojas, but anyway, I'm not sorry that he won't be our manager anymore. He seems like a good guy, good baseball man. Keep him in the organization, but I want to watch him. But the Kevin Cash in the World Series. What are you doing taking out Blake Snell? It's the final game of the World Series. This is your guy. He's your guy. You leave him in if he's pitching well.
Right. It is hard. Like I agree with you. There are times you're like, gosh, that just seems like that's just too much. You want to see that person persevere. I would submit that unless Dusty Baker is managing, Kerry Wood doesn't get 20 strikeouts in damn near a perfect game, because they'd be like, you're coming out. You're too young. Right. You're only going to pitch this, and so you wouldn't.
And now, but to be fair, Kerry Wood could say, or someone who loved Kerry Wood might say, what happened to my career? I blew my arm out, Yeah. But, if as a fan, you're just like, well, no, set the record. And, Santana, keep him in, throw the no-hitter and let's win now. I mean, I'm a big, these opportunities just don't come along very often. And when you get them, you go for it. And the playoffs start tonight and I don't want to see guys getting pulled if they're pitching well, I just, anyway, that's my little bugaboo. Old man ranting at the clouds.
There gets to be some of that old man because you need to see it. But then again, so like Ricky Henderson broke the leadoff hitter role because he was so good. Everybody thought everybody needed a fast guy, but he was a guy because we didn't know back then. He was a guy that got on base all the time. You could be faster than Ricky Henderson. Doesn't matter. He's on base 40% of the time. And boy, did he change the game with his speed when he was on the Mets. I can't remember the outfielder you guys had. He was a former Dodger player. But he stole more bases than he ever. I don't know why every team who wants to steal bases doesn't just hire him as their guy because he is the master, right? And he would change the game. And Mookie had that kind of speed. You remember like the mid-'80s Mets, Vince Coleman would be off of the dugout part of the base on the turf, nowhere near the base, just standing there. And if you throw it to first, I could take off or I'll still beat you back. Like it was so exciting. We don't have that now.
No. And look, maybe, over the course of 162 games, they're right. You shouldn't steal bases. But in a game, in the seventh inning, if you're on first base and you're a fast guy you could disrupt the game and draw a throw, and who knows what could happen. And it just seems like play the game that's right there, that's happening. And that's what's so frustrating as a fan these days. Is it just seems like, the other day I saw somebody bunt for a base hit against the what's it called, where they all go to one side, the
shift.
The shift. Somebody bunted for a base hit against the shift, and it was so exciting because you were like, yes, he sees that there's giving him the base, and so he's going to take it. And it felt like, all right, like they're playing a game to win, like kids in a sandlot, as opposed to, robots in a computer game.
No two players impacted the bat more than Vince Coleman. I'll say Tim Raines too. Vince Coleman, Tim Raines,
and Ricky Anderson. Yeah, Tim Raines was great.
Sure, because they had usually had Carney Lansford hitting behind him, and it didn't bother him to have Ricky out there doing Ricky things. And if you didn't throw them fastballs, Ricky would be on third, and that's uncommon for base stealers to take second and then third. And he stole third more than anybody else. Yeah. But that pressure caused Carney's like, I don't have to guess. I know what's coming. It's going to be a fastball, and there's going to be this huge hole. And I don't know why they haven't figured out how to calculate that, because those guys were menaces, and you had to pay attention. And even though you're not throwing 100% over there, you are throwing close to it to throw over. And those are pitches that are burning up out of a pitcher as well.
Yeah.
I would like to see more of that come back into the game.
Yeah. So would I. It's exciting.
Can we talk about your uncle real quick? You got time for this?
Sure.
This guy wrote a pretty good movie, I hear.
Well, I think you mean my grandfather.
Grandfather. I bet it was your uncle. Yeah. I bet it was like a great uncle or something like that.
No. So yes, I actually just wrote a book about my grandfather and great uncle. My grandfather was Herman Mankiewicz, who wrote Citizen Kane. And my great uncle was Joe Mankiewicz, who wrote and directed All About Eve and Cleopatra, Letter to Three Wives, a whole bunch of films. And I just wrote this book, which I'm going to plug since I'm here. So this is my other book. It came out the same day that the film aired. It was a crazy coincidence. Competing with Idiots, Herman and Joe Mankiewicz, a dual portrait. And I whipped this book off 19 years. And it's about the two of them and their lives and their careers and how they impacted each other and loved and hated and competed with each other. And yeah, it was a pretty good movie, Citizen Kane, I think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Here it is, Competing with Idiots. I'll put the link in here, Competing with Idiots. Is this, are these your two most recent projects? And is there anything in the pipeline that we need to discuss, or is it
nothing in the pipeline? There is something in the pipeline that it's just too early because nothing is signed, but it would be something that if it happens, I will come back and talk to you about.
Yeah, I love it, man.
I think you'd like it. Yeah.
I could talk baseball with you all day. It's
so
great.
Did you grow up a Dodger fan, a Giant fan, an Angel fan?
I'm from California, and so my home team was the A's, and I got to see them a lot because my dad worked for the transit company that's right next door to the stadium, and so I could just hop across the fence and just be at his work. And then I just, for whatever reason, attached to the Dodgers, probably because I'm a bit of a contrarian, and so a lot of my friends were Giants fans, and the Giants were terrible. And I loved the Dodgers when they had those white straps on the back of their for their sunglasses and those uniforms. They stood out to me, So But like you, I'm just a baseball fan. I can celebrate. I know a lot about the Mets because they were so damn good, and you had to respect it. And that stuff on Mike Scott that you put in was just fantastic. He was so dastardly and damned good, and he
was great, and he loved. I think he understood the theater of it all, and he liked playing the villain, and even to this day, what he told Perlman, I'll leave it for my book. Well, when are you going to write your book? Never. It's just great.
But just like Gaylord Perry, there's Mike Scott just rubbing the shit out of the ball, and you're like, I know he's doing it. He's in your head. He's beyond the game at this point, and that was what was great about it. Who took the bucket full of balls and was throwing the balls on the field? Lost their mind because he's scuffing the ball, and maybe he was, but
that's two things. I mean, so they collected a bucket of balls that night, game 4 of the NLCS, and then sent them to the league office. And the league office was like, well, you could have done this yourselves. I mean, you know, whatever. Like, this doesn't prove anything. But then Ed Hearn, all these years later, he had stored them in a sanitary sock. And I read about this and contacted him, and he was like, well, I can't find them. And then he found one, and he had it shipped from his parents' house in Florida to where he was in Kansas City. So he showed us this ball from 35 years ago, and you can see it was scuffed. And what's interesting is, since the film aired, you know, Ed says, yeah, it's this. And he had the sandpaper and he was doing it. But somebody else said, no. What it was Alan Ashby, the catcher, would scrape it on his shin guard and throw it back to him like that. So they could never find anything on Scott. So it was the shin guard.
Right.
I don't know. But
you can't put it on Scott. You can't give him the job of scuffing it. You throw it around the base. Whatever you do, you scuff it elsewhere. And by the way, if Mike Scott was on the 86 Mets, they'd love the hell out of him.
Yeah. That's what was fun about that Astros series, is they had some characters like Kerfeld and Nolan Ryan. And they had, you know, as Mitchell says, like, you know, we had swag, they had swag, you know, and there was like, Hatcher had a lot of swagger, and Davey Lopes was on that team. And they were a really fun, you know, they were a fun bunch.
One more real quick question. What was the last cut, the hardest cut that didn't make the book or the movie?
Oh, well, that didn't make the book. I mean, I think everything made the book because it had more space. You know, there was something the other day I was looking up that isn't in the book. Basically, we had to compress the aftermath. You know, when I was first thinking about this, I thought this was going to be a 7-hour series, and the final hour was going to be post parade to now. And we're going to really get into 87, what happened in 88, 89, 90. And we didn't have time for that. It was, the market said, we want 4 hours. We gave them 4 hours, so that we compressed it all into basically a 6.5 minute musical montage. But I feel like there were some great stories in those years that didn't make it into the show, that do make it into the book. And in particular, there's one, Mookie Wilson tells this great story, which I wanted to be in the film, but we just didn't have time for it, of the first time he ran into Bill Buckner afterwards. You know, and Mookie's such a nice person. He felt horrible about what had happened to Buckner, and that he was being blamed, and it was so unfair because Mookie might have beaten him. And even if he hadn't beaten him, they're going to the 11th inning tied. And, you know, and he was just instantly vilified and instantly the symbol of Red Sox failure. And anyway, Mookie said that he felt guilty and he didn't talk to him and didn't see him. And then Mookie was traded to the Blue Jays, and the Blue Jays are playing in Kansas City, and he's limbering up, and all of a sudden he sees Bill Buckner on the Royals. And Mookie was like, I didn't know he was on the Royals. How he got there, I didn't know. And he's walking towards him, and Mookie was just limbering up before the game, stretching in the outfield grass, and Buckner's getting closer and closer to him, and Buckner's got a bat in his hand. And Mookie was like, I don't know what to say to him. I don't know what, you know. And Buckner says, hey, Mookie, you want to hit me some ground balls? And it cracked everybody up, and it sort of started this friendship. And the two of them went on and signed at shows and, you know, autograph shows and stuff, and kind of became friendly. But yeah, that was one where I really wish we'd had time for it, because the way Mookie tells the story is great.
One of the things that's funny about all these things, Calvin Schiraldi also in his role in the whole thing. We never mentioned Gary Carter hardly at all. This thing is so great, man. I love it. I love Once Upon a Time in Queens. It was so good. I loved it. I love seeing like people with the Bears jerseys and like the B-roll footage that's going on. I'm like, yes, that's how the 80s was. Like, we loved the Bears. They were so exciting. I loved all of these things. But the thing about all of this, and for a long time, maybe not so much now, but for a long time, and maybe this is still true, people thought that was the end of the World Series. Like, there's a whole other game 7, you know? It's like the Barton stuff in Chicago. If or what is his name, Gonzalez, if he would have just done the double play, game over, no problem. You know? Yeah, exactly. It's like they had a whole other game. You know, John McEnroe, this was cut at the very end. He said it's like the Olympic hockey team. You know, you think they beat the Russians, that's it. They got a whole other game they got to play on Sunday. And it was the same thing. Like, and then game 7, they fall behind 3-0, and it's the 6th inning, and you know they've got to rally and
do come back. But yeah, it's a great story. I mean, I felt so thrilled that like somehow for some reason nobody had ever done this in long form documentary before. There'd been some terrific. I mean, the year end video that the Mets put together in '86 was great. It's called A Year to Remember. You can find it online. It's really great. But it's only an hour, and it's all about '86, and it doesn't go into the city or anything, or the cocaine, obviously. And then there was another really good one done in the 20th anniversary by SNY here in New York. Really good, but again, only an hour. And then Doc and Daryl was done, and Perlman did his book. Eric Sherman's done books, but nobody had come along and said, "Wait, this is the era of the long form documentary of OJ Made in America." Like that was the inspiration. So I felt really, really lucky to be able to get to tell this story.
I don't want to keep you too long, but I can't shut up. I got to ask one more real quick question.
No, it's fine.
One of the things that baseball has gotten better, I'm not saying great, but you don't hear about baseball players going broke. For the most part, you don't hear about them being addled by drugs. They've done a lot to provide opportunities for players to be a better version of themselves. And it's not that it's impossible to be a Gooden and a Strawberry, because those guys had a lot of damage to go with the abuse, drug abuse that they put themselves through. But it seems to me that baseball does a better job than, say, football of getting guys transitioned out of hard upbringings and into a professional, sustainable life.
Yeah, I can't speak to the other sports because I just don't know. I do feel like but in general, society is better these days about recognizing, hey, you come from a traumatic background, and now we're offering you all these riches and wealth and all the opportunities and as Ojeda says in the film, you're young, you got a pocket full of money. It's a recipe for debauchery if no one is looking out for you. And I think that sports teams now do a much better job. I mean, you could be cynical and say, well, they're protecting their investment. But they're also, I think they care more holistically about the whole athlete and want that person to succeed. It's just better for everybody if they do.
As a grown man looking at a young player like a 19-year-old Gooden, did he belong on that team, or should they have done a better job of protecting him from himself and from them?
Well, look, I mean, he would tell you that he belonged and that it was ultimately his choice to put whatever he put into his own body. Yeah. But yes, they could have done a better job of protecting them. They could have and probably should have, and in future years have. But on the other hand, addiction it's a mysterious thing. And if the addict wants drugs, it's going to be very hard to keep them from it if that's what they want. I think that psychologically, he had demons that what's interesting, as a Met fan in the 80s, we knew Darryl Strawberry, haunted guy, troubled guy, getting in fights with the other team, with his team, snapping at sports writers, also charming and charismatic and smile that lit up the room, but trouble. And we knew he came from a troubled background. We knew his father had left and it had been a whole thing. Dwight Gooden was presented as comes from a solid middle-class background. His parents were at his first game. He seems to get along great with both of them. We had no idea the depth of the trauma that he was part of and witness to in his childhood, and that obviously ignited whatever problems or made worse whatever problems and made him more susceptible to the things that he yielded to and the temptations. So that was a revelation to me. It was just, wow, your mother shot your father? Like that doesn't happen in most middle-class homes. And, he lived and they stayed together and it's okay. And, happy anniversary. I didn't shoot you this year, but weird, very, very weird.
Yeah. And it makes you think instantly of Ty Cobb.
Yes.
There was a guy that had some baggage, right? And even less society tools to deal with it. Either way, Once Upon a Time in Queens is awesome. Everybody should watch it on ESPN 30 for 30. It is so, so good. And I'll say I love the series on the Bulls. I'd put yours right up there with it. And I mean this as an ultimate compliment. It was both of your guys' series just nailed the era, nailed the vibe. And you got the parts that were so great about the Mets, like just that they were relentless. Okay, I got a dribbling crap ass base hit. I didn't barrel it, but I'm on first. You have to deal with it. By the way, behind me is Ray Knight. By the way, behind him, and it's just like relentless. I just loved it, man. I loved it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm so glad it's on ESPN Plus. It's on demand, and I think it's now also on iTunes and Amazon and Google, however you get video on Google. I think they actually just released it today. And actually, they just told me it's going to be on, for people who don't like football, it's going to be on Sunday the 17th and the 31st. They're doing 2 hours the afternoon of Sunday the 17th on ABC and 2 hours on Sunday the 31st on ABC at 3 o'clock. So those will be very heavily censored. The uncensored version is on ESPN Plus and ESPN. ESPN2 is also showing the censored version.
Yeah, they'll have to censor it. There's some free speech going on.
Oh, yes. You don't get Lenny Dykstra without the need to.
No, you do not.